After 5 chaotic years, I got pregnant. He ghosted, I lost the baby, and he grew distant. I found proof he'd been with another girl while I was carrying our child. Now I'm lost at 15 weeks, confused and desperate for closure. My boyfriend and I have been in a relationship for 5 years, starting in 2019. Initially, things were tumultuous due to his struggle with honesty. He had a girlfriend whose situation I did not fully comprehend. He claimed their relationship was purely circumstantial, as it was more financially feasible for both of them, and she depended on him for her visa. They should have probably parted ways a long time ago, yet he felt confined by the fact that she lacked a vehicle. We managed to work through it, but I later discovered he was frequently in contact with other women, lying about it even while living with my father and me. Although we broke up a few times, we always reconciled since he would implore me to return, professing his deep love for me. Fast forward to 2022, and although we are now renting a place together, I increasingly feel a lack of affection and see no growth in our relationship because he seems uninterested in advancing his life. I also wanted to relocate to another city to pursue my career. I believed we were on good terms, but that summer turned toxic, with him pleading to join me in the new city. He promised to buy me a car if he moved with me. When he relocated to my city, he never clearly communicated that we were officially together again. I brought this up several times because it would have meant he would stop engaging with other girls, which he did not do, nor did I. I also covered the costs associated with our move. When his car was stolen, he canceled the insurance without informing me. Meanwhile, my vehicle broke down during a visit home, leading us to a financially strained situation in which my father paid to fix both our cars. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. every day to drive him to work, or I had to walk an hour to university in the cold. There was a complete absence of gratitude or willingness to improve our circumstances. Things improved slightly when I switched careers and began working in the adult industry, OnlyFans. Despite this being unconventional, he fully encouraged my decision, and I began earning a good income to the extent that I was supporting us both and planning vacations. Nonetheless, I still felt that love had faded, and I became aware that he was messaging other women. I checked his phone. His car was stolen yet again, this time beyond repair. For a year, I drove him to work and waited for him to finish each day, causing me significant strain, but I felt I had no other choice at that time. During this period, I became involved in a parasocial sexting relationship with another man. To me, it was never serious since it was never intended to happen in real life, but I recognize now how impulsive and foolish that was. I sought validation and wanted to be told I was beautiful and attractive. My boyfriend snooped through my phone while this was happening, disconnecting the Wi-Fi and logging into my accounts to read my journals, where I had penned some harsh thoughts about our situation, but it was meant to be private. In hindsight, I see the irresponsibility and how it led to the deterioration of our relationship. He claimed to forgive me. By July last year, I was fed up with his stagnant life, while I was trying to grow personally and professionally. Despite my efforts, he treated me poorly while I continued to do everything for him, including planning and financing another trip. At this time, I was making a considerable amount of money. I even bought him a car, but shortly after, we ended our relationship. He acknowledged it was over and needed time to focus on his success. I offered to let him stay until he found a new place, assisting him with the transition. I regularly checked in on him to see if he was searching for accommodations, as every time I saw him, he seemed preoccupied with social media. Eventually, he found a somewhat acceptable apartment, though it was quite basic for the small, unremarkable city where we lived. He interpreted my inquiries as pressure to move out and perceived it as being forced into a less than ideal situation with strangers. On the day he was supposed to inform the landlord of his decision, I discovered I was pregnant. We were thrilled, having always wanted children and viewing this as a catalyst to rekindle our relationship. However, I miscarried 2 weeks later. Despite the loss, we seemed to be in a good place, but he was not very supportive. He pressured me to get back into the gym only 3 days after the miscarriage while I was still physically suffering. He neglected to check on my well-being, claiming we could try for another baby in the future. A month later, when his family inquired about my feelings, he remarked that he had forgotten it was a significant event. Regardless, I still desired to be with him. I felt we were healthy, and I noticed him beginning to communicate with me more effectively. He managed to get himself to work independently. I thought our relationship had stabilized, and we discussed purchasing a house together. He asked about the kind of rings I liked, and although I pushed for more commitment, he assured me it would happen in due time. We decided to try for a baby, and by December, I found out I was pregnant again. He expressed excitement, and we talked about sibling names, parenting, and what our life would entail, believing this child would grow up in a stable environment within a healthy relationship. However, around the 10-week mark, he became uncommunicative, simply stating, "I don't feel well." He expressed feelings of being trapped due to a lack of friends, financial stability, and dissatisfaction with his life and body. It took him 3 days to convey this to me, during which I cried and eventually lashed out, desperate for any form of communication. I panicked because if he had changed his mind, terminating the pregnancy would be much more complicated. At that point, it was still merely an option without any pro-life viewpoints. I reassured him of my support in helping him achieve his goals because I genuinely loved and cared for him. He suggested couples counseling, but I hesitated to make the appointment until I felt reassured of his love for me since his demeanor had turned so cold. He began working extended hours and spending more time at the gym. Coincidentally, he was unable to accompany me to my first ultrasound appointment. Although I tried to show him the photos, he didn't seem interested or excited and appeared unsettled. His car broke down, and it turned out I had bought him a problematic vehicle. I essentially gave him my car, as it was unsuitable due to needing space for a car seat, and he had spilled battery acid in the trunk and purchased a practical family car, appropriate for future children. 3 weeks later, while visiting our families in another city, we excitedly discussed our future plans, which they were already aware of. However, I mentioned that we would meet his family in a neighboring country the following month, operating under the assumption we would still be together then. It was only after I noticed he had followed a girl on social media, within 2 weeks someone who fit his type who also followed him, that something in my stomach dropped. His best friend followed her, but she did not reciprocate the follow. She was also 20. I brought this up because my instincts were uneasy, and he claimed his best friend was interested in her. I questioned why the girl had a boyfriend but was not following his friend, but he dismissed it and became defensive. Upon returning, we had a significant conversation in which he admitted he was unhappy in our relationship. His feelings had evaporated, and if he stayed, he would resent not only me but also the baby. He understood that a child could strain a relationship. He felt resentment towards me for my earlier sexting relationship, since watching me be fixated on another guy had hurt him. I fully acknowledged my role in the situation and took responsibility for my actions. He expressed a desire for time apart since he felt we could work things out if it weren't for the impending arrival of our baby. He admitted that he wished he had walked away years ago and had only realized he needed to communicate these feelings as the pregnancy progressed, which made it all the more daunting given our situation. I decided to leave and drive 6 hours to my hometown, planning to stay a week, but only managing 2 nights. I did not inform him I was coming back. In a moment of emotional vulnerability, I mistakenly thought Valentine's Day was Thursday and wanted to be together for the occasion. During my time away, we communicated amiably. While gone, I messaged the girl out of desperation. She did not respond, and I did not mention my pregnancy or that I was his girlfriend. I just asked if they were talking, as I genuinely sought clarity without harsh feelings toward her. Upon returning, I entered an absolute nightmare. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night, and when I did, I was plagued by nightmares about our situation. He still lived in our house and had no intentions of moving out. I managed all our bills and half the rent. That Thursday, which I mistakenly thought was Valentine's Day, I used a secret Instagram account to view the girl's stories. She worked at his place, and it seemed she had received a Valentine's Day gift, which alarmed me. He insisted he had not given her anything, asserting they were merely friends and that he did not find her attractive. On Friday, he brought me flowers and informed me he had to work late. His location became unavailable, and around the same time, she received flowers at a park from their workplace. I could not bear to go out to dinner that night. I was utterly exhausted and could not eat or sleep, consumed by the thought of becoming a single mother. We engaged in numerous conversations where I pleaded for him to stay, promising I would attend therapy and change. I felt desperate because I envisioned us becoming a family, but he stated it was too late and expressed his need to walk away. On Saturday, he told me he had to work in the morning, and I noticed my old car was making an odd noise. Concerned he might break down, I offered him my new car instead. I inquired if he could take me to my Pilates class since I had already paid for it, but he claimed he could not leave work. I decided to cancel my class. That morning, a dreadful feeling washed over me. Something felt amiss. He typically connects to the internet at work when lacking data, but he had not done so. I accessed his computer. It was logged out except for his Spotify account. When I clicked on it, I found a playlist titled Ripple, created 2 weeks earlier, featuring a selfie of her as the cover. My emotions spiraled out of control. I confronted him about his lies, connecting the playlist to our TV and escalating the volume. I rushed to his workplace, where no one had seen him, and they doubted he had shown up at all. He was a manager, making it nearly impossible for him to hide. I checked her Instagram, where I found she was on a plane, a large one, the kind that requires driving to a nearby city 2 hours away. He begged me to return home to discuss everything, and I eventually complied. I noticed the mileage on my car had been reset, and it had been emptied, refilled but not completely, indicating someone had driven it. My car was covered in bugs, suggesting it had been on the highway. While questioning him about everything, he was evasive at first but ultimately admitted that he had not been at work and had been with her. I found this hard to accept, assuming he had taken her to the airport. She had quit her job, only working there on breaks since she lived 2 hours away. He confessed he had never revealed my pregnancy to her since it had never come up, noting that he had mentioned having a girlfriend while expressing resentment towards me and feelings of being trapped. It felt eerily familiar to how our relationship had started. He stated he shouldn't have to disclose his friendship with her to me. It was none of my business. Then, perhaps due to my fixation on her, I noticed she had posted several bikini pictures on Instagram set to a song by Sabrina Carpenter titled Juno, specifically a part that read, "Hold me and explore me, mark your territory, I'm so horny." My boyfriend liked one of my posts, which I suspected was meant for him. It also seemed like she and her boyfriend had unfollowed each other. I became obsessed with her, while acknowledging my partner's feelings were legitimate. I could not help but think that if he had not grown closer to her, we might have managed to work through our issues. Ultimately, I just wanted my loving boyfriend back. I realized the depth of my shortcomings and went back through my old journal entries to understand the root of my problems, recognizing I might have become a reflection of my mother, who was abusive, leading to our estrangement. I expressed to him that I understood what needed to change and was committed to improving myself for both our baby and our relationship. Now, I find myself overwhelmed, nearly 15 weeks along, filled with self-loathing and frustration regarding our circumstances. I am incredibly sleep-deprived and have asked him to move out so that I can have time to grieve. I plan to remain no contact with him until the baby is born unless there is something important he needs to address. I am unsure of what steps to take or whom to turn to for support. This is clearly my perspective, and I wish I could ask him to share his side as well. If you made it this far, thank you for taking the time to read. I deeply appreciate it. What can I do to potentially save my relationship? What steps can I take to be healthier for myself and in my relationships? Edit: my bullet point format was disorganized. Story 2. Reunited for Christmas, I discovered she'd been lying and cheating. Heartbroken, I'm stuck in chaos, questioning everything. I struggled to find a suitable title since I find it difficult to express everything clearly. I must apologize in advance, as this may be somewhat perplexing. I do not engage in social activities much and lack individuals in my life with whom I can communicate who do not dismiss my viewpoints or truly comprehend me. Most of my time is devoted to my children, as I am a stay-at-home father. The mother of my children, 3 kids, one being my stepdaughter, whom I have known since she was 4 months old and is now 4, so she feels like my own, and I have been together for 5 years, although we have spent the last 3 years in an on and off dynamic. 2 years into our relationship, she became pregnant with our second child. During this time, I felt that our relationship was stagnating, and I sensed a dwindling interest from her. I attempted to discuss topics she liked or things I wished to share, but it seemed futile as she gradually ceased to be my partner. Even our sexual connection seemed to diminish. We grew distant, and as an introvert, I felt isolated and dejected by my significant other. Gradually, I began to withdraw. I started staying at a coworker's house after we relocated away from our families due to my job, and since the house was in her name, I felt I had no choice. I met a female colleague who noticed my distress and reached out, so I confided in her. I ended up spending some time at a hotel with her. It only happened 3 times. I informed the mother of my children that I was unhappy and wished to move on. In response, she started an OnlyFans account to support herself as a soon-to-be single mother, despite knowing I was committed to providing for our children and that she had her own income. She labeled me a cheater and a disgusting person, and while I admit my actions were inappropriate due to our children, I still feel my emotions are valid. During this period, I was involved in a severe car accident that fractured a vertebra in my spine and totaled my vehicle. I managed to keep working at a Target distribution center, but the physical demands became unbearable. With my car gone, I found myself back at home with the mother of my children, relying on her mother's vehicles to commute to work. I felt immense guilt about the situation, and possibly due to the near-death experience, I hoped our circumstances would improve. The first 6 months to a year of being together again were wonderful. We felt like a happy family. However, the same patterns began to re-emerge. This time, as the stay-at-home parent, I was isolated in a new city where I knew no one, whereas she had a history there and numerous contacts. As a result, she often reminded me that her work life was private. Over the course of a year, our communication dwindled because she seemingly developed resentment toward me stemming from our prior issues, despite my persistent attempts to atone for my mistakes. After losing my job, my obsession with her intensified as she became my sole connection to the outside world. I had already lost nearly everything. My children and her were all I had left, given that I lacked friends, social media presence, and contact with my family. Eventually, she expressed that she no longer had the energy for our relationship and refused to provide any explanation. After 3 years of silence, I moved back to my mother's home as I had nowhere else to stay. We were apart for 6 months, during which I diligently tried to win her back, fueled not only by my deep affection, but by her insistence that our separation was merely a break, that no one could replace me, and that she still loved me. However, she would become aggressive at the mention of me seeing anyone else, and she would block me. Fast forward to Christmas Eve, I returned to be with my children and effectively resumed living with her. On New Year's Day, I uncovered the truth she was lying to me. She had been involved with a substance abuser who came to her door, shouting her name and creating a scene, which led me to confront him and escort him away from my children. Not only that, but she had also been engaging with multiple other men, sharing explicit photos, her work schedule, and delving into deep conversations with them, all while I had no way of knowing the extent of her infidelity. She claims it is irrelevant since we were not together at that time, yet she reacted intensely when I attempted to move on, even trying to restrict access to our children. I desired her before our split and maintained that desire throughout our separation. She acknowledged this and assured me that I had nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, I only discovered the truth after rekindling our relationship. Now, I find myself still living with her because I prefer not to return to my mother's home, where she is possessive of our children, and the accommodation is cramped. When my kids are over, I have to sleep on the floor. My mother is also uncomfortable with them staying overnight, making it unfeasible for me to live there. While I am at my mother's, I would be without transportation or entertainment, only forced to endure conflicts with her in her small 1-bedroom apartment in a town where I have faced harassment and hostility from locals. Every piece of furniture I owned is now with the children. I no longer possess anything. I'd essentially have to rebuild my life from scratch, which is incredibly challenging, especially given my felony record from the past and no vehicle, making job hunting difficult as I would need to work around her schedule, which varies. I am uncertain if I am seeking advice or merely venting. I lack anyone to confide in about these personal dilemmas. Apologies for the disorganization of my thoughts. I could elaborate further, but I am overwhelmed, not accustomed to writing so much. In summary, a decline in our relationship led me to attempt to part ways. My car crash brought me back home, where the mother of my children pretended to desire to revive our love. I developed a dependency on her. However, she ultimately failed me again, leaving me devastated while lying throughout our time apart. Now she wants me to remain because she claims to genuinely need me, but I am heartbroken from what I have discovered. Are my feelings unjustified because we were separated? I feel conflicted about her wanting to resume being my life partner when I find it hard to trust after learning what she was involved in during our separation. Am I in the wrong?